Okay, that should do it. I think that's the audio I needed right there. I'm pretty sure that that worked. I apologize, everyone. I usually use the Streamlabs desktop for Apple, and we've been having some issues with that, getting all glitchy and um, uh, uh, choppy. And so I've been working with their tech support all week. And when I went to go live tonight, it just completely froze up. I changed everything the way that they told me to, and it just completely froze up. And I apologize for that. So now I am on the backup, which is their web based application, which is probably the way I'm going to have to do things from now on, which is frustrating, but we will soldier on. So, anyway, I apologize, but we should have audio now. Everybody should be able to hear me. I should be able to see your questions in the chat. And I'm ready to talk about what's happening in Utah politics. I'm ready to hear from you and hear what you have to say and what you want to talk about. So, we've got a lot to talk about this evening. So I apologize, but we do have the audio now working, and everybody should be able to hear me. Okay, so I think we're all set. But everyone should be able to hear me finally. But we are live everywhere. So let's get into it. There's a lot of stuff happening here in Utah politics tonight that I want to talk about, and hopefully you want to talk about it as well. On the show tonight, the Democratic primary in the 1st Congressional District cost $6.1 million. The 8 candidates and outside groups spent $6.1 million on that primary on a congressional district that didn't exist a year ago. And it now, Ben McAdams is the Democratic nominee, and he is the odds-on favorite to become the next member of Congress from Utah. So that's one thing that I want to talk about tonight. Also, when I was going over these campaign finance reports to figure out how much the 3 congressional primaries cost, I noticed some weirdness about Phil Lyman's campaign, or an outside group that stepped in to help Phil Lyman. And what do you know? It's the same dark money group that put a bunch of money towards his gubernatorial campaign in 2024, and it's completely funded by an organization or a company that appears to be linked to his family. We will go over that, but you should be able to hear me now with the audio problems. What else is on the agenda this evening? I don't know if you saw this today. The New York Times released their list of presidential contenders, their long list. They do this every once in a while. Everyone who could possibly run for Congress in 2020, or excuse me, for president in 2028. And wouldn't you know it, Spencer Cox is once again on the list of possible gubernatorial candidates. It's just like from Mean Girls. Stop trying to make Spencer Cox happen. It's not going to happen. He's not going to be a viable candidate for president. I had some reporting yesterday and today about some interesting financial stuff going on with the Davis County GOP, and it just points out a lot of problems we have with our overall campaign finance system. Utah's campaign finance laws are a joke, and this story that I wrote about the Davis County GOP just shows it's a perfect example of really nobody's watching the hen house, and there's really nothing to incentivize people who are giving money in politics and politicians and outside groups. There's no real disincentive to violate the law. You're looking at maybe $100 fine if you don't do things correctly. So we'll talk about that this evening. I'll give you a little bit of an update on my lawsuit against the Utah legislature. The legislature has asked for the full 10th Circuit to rehear my appeal. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, the 10th Circuit ruled in my favor, at least in 2 arguments of my appeal. And if you read the legislature's argument about that ruling, it pretty much sounds like they are setting the stage to completely get rid of press passes, freeze the press out, and then blame me for it. So we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll get into this tonight. Some of the lunatics who support Phil Lyman, specifically Sophie Anderson, who I know is probably watching tonight, or someone involved with her. They're once again dredging up something that happened 4 years ago and trying to show or trying to insinuate that I was colluding with Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson when it was a normal reporter and politician relationship. They got a hold of some text messages between the two of us. She still doesn't have it right. There were some names redacted in those text messages, and I think it's so funny because she thinks that some of the names, or she thinks that the names that have been blacked out, she thinks they're certain names, and she couldn't be more wrong. Anyway, she's stupid and a lunatic. We might talk about that tonight. Senator Mike Lee, thinks that he is cooking with the whole Olive Garden. You know, you have to show ID to get a never-ending pasta at Olive Garden, but you don't have to show ID to vote. He thinks he's got something there. Unfortunately, the Republicans in the Senate aren't going to vote for the SAVE Act. They're just not going to do it. They don't want to pass it. So we can talk about that. Spencer Cox has changed his mind on fireworks, saying that the drought conditions are getting a little bit better. So he's easing some of those restrictions, but Salt Lake County says they're still going to ban fireworks ahead of Pioneer Day. So that's all this. There's a number of things that we can talk about tonight on the show. And I want to hear what you want to talk about as well. Leave your questions and your comments in the chat, and we'll get to all of that tonight. But welcome in. Let me introduce myself. My name is Brian Schott. I am the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. You'll find us online at utahpolitics.news. I'm an independent journalist. That means there is no corporation backing this. I don't have a billionaire writing me checks. I don't have someone like Elon Musk or, whomever, the Ellisons, writing me checks to make this possible. It's just me. And it's funded by my readers, my viewers, and my listeners on the podcast, people who support and value this kind of independent journalism. I love being independent because it allows me to cover stories that I think are important and give me an opportunity to explain to you why I think you should think they're important. But the downside is, I need your assistance to make these types of shows possible. So if you value what I do, if you want more stories like I wrote, like the one I wrote today about the Davis County GOP's finances, and we've got an update on that. If you value that kind of investigative journalism, that kind of independent journalism, I would ask you to do a couple of things. First of all, whichever app you're watching me on tonight, whichever platform you're watching me on tonight, make sure you drop a follow. Just give me a follow. That's an easy thing to do. Next, go over to utahpolitics.news. That's my website. Sign up for my newsletter. It's absolutely free. You'll get most of my journalism sent directly to your inbox for free. If you want to make more live streams like this possible, more reporting possible, more podcasts possible, there's a couple of things you can do. You can become a paying subscriber. It's $5 a month or $55 a year. That helps support this enterprise and keeps it going. Or if you don't want to do a subscription, and I understand times are hard, but maybe you've got $5-10 you want to throw in the tip jar, you can do that. All of that money goes to making this enterprise, this independent journalism product, possible. So that out of the way, let's get into tonight's program. So what do we want to talk about tonight? What is the main thing we want to talk about tonight? Let's see. We've got some comments already. Narcoleptic, let's see if I can put this up here. Narcoleptic Mama on YouTube says Utah doesn't even like him. Broadly speaking, Governor Cox wouldn't do very well even in his own state. Yeah, that's from the New York Times article. Their headline on that is "Who Might Run for President in 2028? The Very Long List." And Spencer Cox shows up in the Republican governor list, and let me see if I can pull this off here. Okay. So Spencer Cox shows up in the list of Republican governors. You've got Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, got Brian Kemp, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and Glenn Youngkin as the 6 Republican governors who they think could run for president. And what they say about Spencer Cox is Spencer Cox of Utah always manages to find his way into national news cycles by presenting a less hardline version of conservative politics. He is that's a nice way of saying he represents a Republican Party that no longer exists. I do not see a universe in which Spencer Cox is the leading candidate to become the nominee of the Republican Party for president. There is no Republican primary voter outside of Utah who has said to themselves, you know who would make a good president? Spencer Cox of Utah. None of them have said that. He got a blip or a surge of good PR in the wake of the Charlie Kirk shooting when he blamed social media, and he's got a point about how social media has really changed our society, coarsened a lot of our discourse, and led to led to a lot of really bad outcomes for our society. He's absolutely right there, but he got a surge of popularity. You could see that a number of the networks were trying to make Spencer Cox a thing. It didn't take. Then Politico had a story in which their columnist said that Spencer Cox should run for president as a sacrificial lamb. He should run for president on this whole social media platform, knowing that he's going to lose, but throw himself into the mix in order to bring this issue up. That's a pretty expensive thing to do. And I don't know if Spencer Cox has the fundraising to do that. He's taken advantage of Utah's extremely lax fundraising laws. But when you're running for president, it's a completely different story. And I don't know if there's the fundraising backing for him to run what he would know would be a losing campaign, because he's not going to win. He's got his book coming out. He's been he goes into the more intellectual areas. He's interviewed on the Atlantic, and I know he's got an interview with the Wall Street Journal this week. I can't wait to see what that's about. Every time he's talking to someone from the national media, they make sure to put that in their public calendar. He wants everyone to know that the national media is talking to Spencer Cox. But again, I just don't see a world in which he becomes the nominee of the Republican Party for president. Narcoleptic Mama says, yeah, he may have done well before the whole data center nonsense, but his true colors have shown. There's been a lot of great reporting out there, but just about how mad American voters are over data centers. And it looks like President Stuart Adams is probably the first, but I doubt he'll be the last politician to be shown the door by voters because they're angry about data centers. That was one of the most catastrophic political blunders I've ever seen in the state. Stuart Adams believed that he was, that he knew what was best for voters, and he had been running things so I guess monarchically for so long. He was unchallenged by anyone that he thought he could do whatever. But he ran into reality when voters were saying, we don't like this, and they showed him the door, and now he is out of the legislature, which is still a shocking result, even more than a month after, or almost a month after the June primary election. And I don't think that he will be the last one to be shown the door. Brad on TikTok says, let it happen. Let Cox waste their money. Chris Hansen says Cox is not liked outside of Utah. I just don't think people know who he is. And I don't think he has the money to, run a campaign. It's expensive. It's a very expensive thing to run for president. And, are we all ready for Cox to spend a lot of time in Iowa? That's the thing you need to watch for. If he's thinking about running for president, and he swears he's not, but if he thinks he's running for or if he's thinking about running for president, watch for him to start spending some time in Iowa or New Hampshire. You know, I'll believe it when I see it. So that's not the first thing I wanted to talk about tonight, but we already did, so I appreciate that. Matt Chappelle on Twitch says, I forgot Utah existed. A lot of people forget that Utah existed. Unfortunately, we have to live here. Sarah Marie on TikTok says, at a minimum, he doesn't look presidential. I will agree with that. I'll agree. He doesn't cut a presidential jib, but again, look at the source. I've really got no room to talk. I'm a schlub in a t-shirt, talking to y'all on the internet. So I don't really have a lot of room to talk about that. Let's see. I want to talk about I wrote this earlier. I wrote this last week, actually. I went through the Federal Election Commission financial disclosures. We finally got the post-primary filings. And outside groups and the 8 Democratic candidates in the Democratic primary in the 1st Congressional District, which did not exist a year ago. It didn't exist until November. They spent $6.1 million on that primary election, which was won by former Congressman Ben McAdams. Got 51.9% of the vote. And if you don't think that money is important in politics, just listen to this stat. McAdams raised and spent more than the rest of the Democratic field combined. He raised nearly $2.3 million and spent $1.97 million. That is more money than the other 7 Democratic candidates in the field combined. Overall, the 8 Democrats who entered the race, they raised more than $3.75 million. $2.3 million of that went to McAdams, which makes sense. He's a former member of Congress. He has a fundraising apparatus still in place. People know him. He has a name ID. That's why he got more. That's why he raised more money than the rest of the field. Overall spending on the race was just around $3.4 million. McAdams spent just under $2 million of that, and independent organizations poured almost $3 million, $2.7 million into the race supporting McAdams. So he spent almost $2 million himself on the race, and independent organizations spent another $2.7 million. All of that money that came in, the independent expenditures, all of it was in support of Ben McAdams. Not a single Democratic candidate, none of the 3 other candidates in the primary or any of the other candidates who either dropped out of the race or were eliminated at the convention got a single dollar of outside money put behind their campaigns. And this just talks about this just shows the importance of money in these races. Veronicat 1402 on YouTube says, what did McAdams spend it on? I didn't see more content than I did for other candidates. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes when you look through these disclosures. There's a lot that was spent on consultants, campaign operatives. There's a lot of administrative costs that go in. And as Katie did it points out, McAdams was the only one with TV ads. He had TV ads himself, and then outside groups purchased TV ads. Nobody else had the money to go up on TV. The other candidates, their advertising was mostly limited to social media. And that's where it all went. Damone asks, first of all, he asks, and this is from TikTok, how much AIPAC money did Adams get? I reported on this. How much AIPAC money did Adams get? $0. He has not taken any money from AIPAC. I know people like to claim he has taken money from AIPAC, but the only money that the big money comes from, or the big claim comes from Track APAC, who claimed that he had taken some money from organizations linked to the pro Israel lobby, but their methodology was crap. And what happened was anybody who donated to a pro Israel group, what and then donated to McAdams, that was tagged as money that was pro-Israel money that went to McAdams. After people started calling Track APAC out for their methodology, they backed off. The only verifiable thing that we can find is, I think it's about a $5,000 or $6,000 donation he took from a pro-Israel group 4 years ago in 2020. He hasn't taken any cents. So when you see people saying he's getting all this money from APAC, he's taking, that is not correct. And other people are saying, well, APAC is hiding the donations. Okay, prove it. Show me that network, because if you can't back it up, it's not true. So McAdams did not take any money from APAC. Now, the other question from Damone says, why can't we get a progressive in a D+24 district? The problem, well, it all comes down to money and name ID. McAdams, the moment he jumped into the race, he was the front runner because people know him. He was a state senator, he was the county mayor, and he was a member of Congress. He's got a track record. People know him. Nate Bluin was a one-term state senator from a state senate district. McAdams was elected county-wide, and Bluin was elected in a safe Democratic district and did not have much name ID outside of that. Same thing with Liban Mohammed. Nobody really knew who he was, and he didn't have the resources to introduce himself to voters. Same thing with Michael Farrell. So that's why you can't get a progressive in a D+24 district. But remember, the first congressional district is not a solid blue district. Yes, it would have voted for Kamala Harris by 23 points or so in 2024 against Donald Trump, but Democrats are still the third largest voting bloc. Registered Democrats only make up about 24% of voters. Independents are the largest bloc at about 34.5%. Republicans are at 33.5%. So, and it's not a D+24, it's more of a D+13, D+12 district, according to the Cook Political Report. So it's not that Democratic. Sure, it's safe Democrat, but it's not a rock solid blue fortress for Democrats. So, and voters, you don't have a bunch of progressive voters living in this district. So that's why you couldn't get a progressive candidate. And the fact that the other candidates in the field who happen to be progressives didn't have the money and didn't have the name ID to take on McAdams. So, that's the easy answer to your question. When you look at this district, yes, it would have gone for Kamala Harris by 24 points, 23 points over Trump in 2024. It would have gone for Biden by the same margin or so over Trump in 2020. That doesn't mean that there are 24% more Democrats in the district. It means that you had independents and Republicans crossing over to cast a vote for Harris and Biden. That's what that means. That's how you have to look at this, because there simply aren't enough Democrats to win this district on its own. Now, I know people are going to say, well, there's a bunch of Democrats who have registered as Republicans so they could vote in a Republican primary. I've said this a million times. There is zero data to back that up. None. The data shows that when Democratic leaders like Jim Debacus were asking Democrats to change their party registration from Democrat to Republican to vote in the 2020 gubernatorial primary, most of the people who changed their affiliation were actually independents who went over to Republicans. And the Princeton Election Project, I believe, or the Princeton Election Lab, did a whole study looking at voters and their movement. And most of the voters who changed their affiliation go from independent to Republican, and then a lot of them go back to independent. We did see some Democrats go from Democratic to Republican, but they didn't come back, and there were far more independents who changed their affiliation. So you can't so, anybody who says that, well, there's just a whole bunch of Republicans in name only voting in these primaries, that's not true. That's not the case. But this district is still, it's majority independent. Right behind it is registered Republicans and then registered Democrats who make up about a quarter of voters. And in order to get the results that everyone was talking about, with Kamala Harris winning by a large margin if this district had existed in 2024, and Joe Biden winning by a large margin if this district had existed in 2020, to get that result, you had Democrats voting for them for sure, but you also had independents and Republicans. And this just goes back to something I reported last year, and I finally was able to crack this nugget. Because what happened was, when the Republicans in the legislature, the reason why they split Salt Lake County into 4 pieces, sure, they divided the Democratic voters among the districts, but what they were looking for, they had data from 2020. Remember, they drew these maps in 2021. They had data from 2020 that showed which Republicans and independents were willing to vote for a Democratic candidate. You had Joe Biden on the ballot, and Joe Biden, he would have won this district. And that's what they split almost equally among the 4 districts. The story is on my website, utahpolitics.news. You'll probably have to search for it a little bit, but I was able to break it down. That's what they did to gerrymander the state. That's how ruthlessly and effectively they gerrymandered the state. Narcoleptic Mama says potentially a whole bunch of independents in name only. Possibly. Let's see. Kung Fu Barbie on YouTube says the turnout seemed really low. Is it because of the way mail-in ballots are sent out? If I remember right, you're only sent one if you're a registered Democrat, and there aren't many of them. Yes, you had to be a registered. Hang on, let me pull these things out here. Okay, you had to be a registered Democrat to get a Democratic ballot, but Republicans and independents could request a ballot. I think there were maybe about 7,000, 8,000 people in Salt Lake County who requested a Democratic ballot that were not Democrats. I saw so many people on social media saying, I didn't get my ballot. I didn't get a ballot for the primary. Well, there's 2 reasons for that. 1, you're either not registered in that party, or 2, there's no primary in your area. And those were the 2 questions that people needed to ask. Not everybody gets to vote in these primaries, even though the Democratic primary is open. So, but yeah, money makes politics go round. And if you don't believe it, just look at that primary. The other candidates never really had a chance. They didn't, because McAdams hoovered up all the fundraising and hoovered up all the support from outside groups, and none of that flowed down to the other candidates. I'm sure that we'll see Nate Bluin and Laban Mohammed and Michael Farrell run for things in the future, and I hope that we do. The more people running, the better. But essentially, this race was kind of over the moment that McAdams got into it, because he just was a Goliath in terms of fundraising, and the other candidates could not keep up. A couple of other notes from the congressional primaries. Blake Moore, as we know, cruised past Carrie-Ann Lisenby, winning by more than 13 points. Lisenby, again, was just massively outmatched financially. From the day she entered the race on March 10th. And from that day until the primary, Blake Moore raised 3 times as much money as she did. He raised, just from that time, he raised $545,000 to her $176,000, and he spent nearly 5 times as much, $776,000 to about $161,000. So again, people were saying that she had a chance. She didn't have a chance. More name recognition. He's a 3-term congressman. He had the fundraising apparatus and mechanism in place, and voters were just more comfortable with him, especially the Republican voters. Even though that happened, we did see outside groups again pour about $1 million into the race. Most of that was either attacking more or supporting more. I told you about this, and I reported this a couple of weeks ago, that this PAC that popped up called the Defending Conservative Values PAC, we found out that they were mostly funded by the Club for Growth. They kicked in about $300,000 of the $487,000 on ads they spent on attacking Blake Moore. Most of that money came from Club for Growth. And then there was a bunch of pro-Moore spending. So there was $487,000 anti-Moore spending and $530,000 in spending supporting Moore. Most of that came from the Defend American Jobs Super PAC, and they spent about $400,000 on ads attacking Moore. Groups connected to Spencer Cox did get involved in this race. There's a local group called Defending Utah Values. It's led by Owen Fuller, who is the former CEO or the former CEO of Lucid. He is a close ally of Spencer Cox. He spent about $50,000 on digital ads opposing Carrie Ann Lisenby in this race, and pumped in another $20,000 on digital ads supporting Blake Moore. Now Moore moves on to take on Democrat Peter Crosby, who's the main opponent in that race. That district is rated R+15, so Moore is going to be a heavy favorite over Crosby. He has more than $1.8 million on hand. Crosby has just $23,000. So again, Crosby massively outgunned in this race, and it is a heavily Republican district. Now, I want to talk about something that happened in the 3rd congressional district, where Representative Phil Lyman, he didn't put up much of a fight against Celeste Malloy. They almost tied at the state convention, and then she whooped him. Like, it was belt to ass in that primary. She not only overwhelmed him at the polls, but she overwhelmed him financially. She outspent him nearly 15-1 from the time he declared his candidacy. And Lyman just couldn't find much financial support for his campaign at all. Only 16 people made donations large enough to trigger disclosure requirements with the Federal Election Commission. Just 16 people. He raised $43,000, just over $43,000 for the entire race. Malloy raised $647,000 from the time he entered in that race. Malloy did get a bunch of outside support. Those groups pumped $1.6 million into the race to boost Malloy, most of that coming from the Defend Our Values Super PAC, which is run by former Representative Chris Stewart, who just happens to be Malloy's former boss. She was a lawyer in his office, and then he unexpectedly resigned in 2023, and then she won the Republican nomination and has been in Congress. This is the November election. So if you think about it, the 2023 primary and the 2023 general and the 2024 primary and the 2024 general, and then the 2026 primary and the 2026 general, this election coming up will be her 6th election, and she still has not completed a full term in Congress. That's crazy. There was a group, this is what I want to talk about a little bit. There was a group that entered the race, an outside group, towards the end. It was a PAC that popped up called Keeping America Strong. And they spent $300,000 on ads attacking Malloy. And this PAC had one donor. It was a group called Government Leadership Solutions. And when I saw that, I was like, wait a minute. Because back in 2024, I exclusively reported, I figured out who that was because Government Leadership Solutions put a whole bunch of money, donated a whole bunch of money to Phil Lyman's gubernatorial campaign. They donated $550,000 to his gubernatorial campaign in 2024. And now they're the only donor to this super PAC that spent $300,000 attacking Celeste Malloy. So that's almost, what is that, $850,000 supporting Lyman in 2024 and in 2026. Now, this group appears to be connected to Lyman's family. I did a lot of digging when this first came up. The business records show that the company shares an address in Lehigh with the Lyman family farm, which is owned by his family. The only listed officer on business filings for Government Leadership Solutions is named Chris Webb, and Chris Webb is also the vice president of Lyman Family Farm. So it looks like his family stepped in and offered some financial support again for his political ambitions. Sometimes when that stuff happens, you just see it pop up, and then you're lucky that you have me, who has a mind like a steel trap and remembers all this crap. My wife constantly says, how do you remember that stuff? I remember a couple of months ago, we were sitting around and she mentioned something about the Bad News Bears. And she said, yeah, that movie came out in 1976. And I said, actually, I think it was actually 1975. And I think I was right. And then she just looks at me and goes, how do you remember this stuff? I just do. It's a gift. And then I spew it out on the internet for all of you. So I thought that was an interesting little tidbit about campaign finance. I don't know if you just saw it on the landscape view, but our dog Daisy just ran into my office and tried to grab something and then hauled ass out of here. That's a puppy. Anyway. So that's on the federal campaign finance stuff. A couple of stories that I wrote this week. We'll actually get to those in a second. Let's go through some of the comments on the live stream, what people have here, to see what they want to talk about, see what they're reacting to. If you have a question or comment, please leave it in the chat, and I will get to it. Let's see what we're talking about on TikTok. And the top part of my glasses just popped off. Let's see. Corn Pop on TikTok says, I really wish you'd dig into the rot that is rampant in the Davis County Republican Party. I did a little bit in terms of the campaign finance stuff. A lot of that stuff is just internal things, and I can't get access to the information unless somebody wants to talk to me. Luckily, people want to talk to me from time to time. Corn Pop also says, also Stuart Adams received $200,000 after losing. That's something noteworthy. Yeah, I noticed those donations too. One is a group that he actually sits on the board of, and then the other is a real estate developer. I think that is fascinating, and trust me, I am digging into it. Death of Pacian, I think, on TikTok says, why is the Lyman campaign so obsessed with what you say? Because the Lyman campaign is run by a bunch of election deniers who I relentlessly reported on in the aftermath of the 2020 election, specifically Sophie Anderson, who is tied up with Tina Peters, who is tied up with Mike Lindell, with a bunch of other election deniers. And they just can't quit me. In fact, she has dredged up something that happened back in 2022 when they did a grammar request and got a hold of some text messages between myself and Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, which is something that happens all the time. I have text message conversations with politicians all the time, and occasionally they'll show up in a grammar request. But they are trying to say that it is some sort of grand conspiracy. What it was about was there was a group that I reported on. I actually won a huge award for this story about this group called Utah Election Integrity. And they were going door to door in communities around Utah trying to do their own election audit in the aftermath of the 2020 election. They were trying to figure out, they were trying to find phantom voters, fraudulent voters, and they were going door to door. And what she had mentioned to me, because I had reached out to her about some of the stuff that I was finding with this group, and she mentioned in a text message that they had actually caught the attention of the feds. The FBI had actually been alerted. So people were calling law enforcement because these people were going door to door and asking them whether they vote or how they voted. And and so they got a hold of this text message chain, and they're trying to paint it as some grand conspiracy between myself and Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson to take down Sophie Anderson. If you remember Sophie Anderson, she got arrested with the granite for disrupting a granite school board hearing in COVID. I think she first came to prominence when they were trying to move the Other Side Academy or some halfway house into her neighborhood, and she led the NIMBY movement. Real peach of a human there. So, unfortunately, my reporting painted her in a bad light. And that's part of the reason why they are so obsessed with what I say, because I speak the truth. They know I speak the truth, and they want to try and discredit me. So that's enough time on Sophie Anderson. And I know that they're watching. Michael Clara, who's part of that crowd, they love to watch this live stream and then clip it and then take stuff out of context and make long videos that nobody watches in order to make their point. So hi, Michael, and your stuff is crap. Okay. And Sophie Anderson, you wish that you could see the things that are redacted in those text messages that you have posted online. You wish that you could see the names. I'm never going to show them to you. Never. They're still on my phone. I'm never going to show them to you. Never, ever, ever. And the names that you've got listed on there, not even close. You're not even close. But keep telling yourself that. Okay, that's enough of my personal vendettas going on there. Let's talk about some other stuff that's happening here. Let's talk about more campaign finance stuff. And someone brought this up in the chat. So we'll talk about the Davis County Republican Party. Now, I started out with a story about how the Davis County surveyor, whose name is Max Elliott, is retiring in September. I believe that he's in his 90s. He has been elected that office 8 times. He is an 8-term county surveyor, and he's retiring. Now, why the county surveyor is an elected office, I couldn't tell you, but it is. And so he's retiring. And so since he's a Republican, that means that the Davis County Republican Party gets to choose a replacement. Now, not anybody can become the county surveyor. Like Trevor Lee could not try to become the county surveyor because he's going to be looking for a job come January. There are some very specific requirements to become a county surveyor. You have to be a registered professional land surveyor in Utah. You have to have a specialized degree in either land surveying or geomatics. You either have to have an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate in those fields. You also have to have 2 to 6 years of experience, and the experience depends on your level of degree. So if you have only an associate's degree, you're going to need 6 years of experience, half of that being supervised by another land surveyor. And they also have to complete additional coursework, the other course they have to take, and pass a licensing exam. So there's very few people who could possibly become the land surveyor in Davis County. maybe one person. In fact, I've heard that maybe it's the number two guy at the office is going to step up and be the only person who's going to file for this. Not everybody can file. But I thought it was odd that the Davis County GOP sent out an email saying, if you want to run for this, if you want to run in the special election for this position, you have to pay a $400 filing fee, which I thought was weird because you're maybe going to get one guy to run for this. And so I reached out to party chair Don Guyman, just asking him, why are you doing this? And he says it's going to help defray the costs of holding the event, because in the past, they don't charge candidates to run, but candidates can buy a table at the convention. But if you're only going to have one guy, there's no need for this person to buy a table. This is a party function. And so, if you think about it, it's just Don Guyman, the chairman of the Davis County Republican Party, trying to get some money to help defray the costs of holding this event, school rental, whatever you need. So I thought that was strange. So I stumbled on another story as I was reporting this one, because I was like, okay, you need $400 from a candidate to help defray costs. So I look at their campaign finance disclosures, and it says they've got $89,000 in the bank. But if you look a little closer, they only filed the report that was supposed to be filed before convention. They had to file 1 week before the convention, and they completely missed filing the pre-primary report, which was due on June 16th. Also, when you start looking into their finances, they report no financial activity after March 17th of this year, zero, like there were no transactions. And the only three expenses that they reported on this pre-primary report were three $80 payments to MailChimp for their email newsletter. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because I know for a fact they had big expenses as a party. They had their annual Lincoln Day dinner fundraiser at the Davis Conference Center. That ain't free. That ain't free at all. I also know that they had to host the neighborhood caucus meetings in March. That ain't free. You got to print up materials. You got to get places to hold these events. That's not free at all as well. And they held the county convention, which again, not free. You have a lot of costs associated with that, but they didn't disclose any of it. All they said was, we paid MailChimp 3 times and that was it. Well, obviously that was wrong. So, being the nosy journalist that I am, I started digging through campaign finance reports for other candidates. And I found a whole bunch of payments to the Davis County Republican Party made by other candidates and political action committees that they didn't disclose on their campaign finance forms. About $20,000 worth, which is a lot. And most of those were associated with Lincoln Day dinner tickets, Lincoln Day dinner tables. They bought table or a booth, or booths at the county convention. None of that was disclosed. There was also $5,000 from the Adams Leadership PAC and $3,000 from House Speaker Mike Schultz's PAC. None of that was disclosed. So I asked them, I said, hey, why didn't you file this report that is required by the state? Everybody has to file a report by this time. Why didn't you file it on time? And what's the deal with all these missing transactions from your report? Well, Don Guyman didn't reply to me, but he did reply, but he didn't really answer my questions. He said they did turn in the missing report after I contacted them. And they updated the other report. In fact, if you go onto the state website and look at their updated pre-convention report, it has 128 amendments, 128 changes. There were 128 transactions that they didn't put on that were missing from that report. That's egregious. That. But the big problem is, Utah's campaign finance laws are a complete joke. Do you know what they're going to get? Do you know what the punishment is for missing the filing deadline for a county political party to miss the filing deadline for the pre-primary report that is required? $100. $100. That's what their that's what their penalty is. Now, somebody could file a complaint about the missing transactions, and the process works like this. First of all, since they missed that that filing, the state law says that they are already guilty of a Class B misdemeanor, but there won't be any prosecution. But the process works like this. If someone were to file a complaint with the lieutenant governor's office about these missing transactions, lieutenant governor's office, when they get the complaint, they investigate and then they inform the party and say, hey, you need to update your filings. You have 7 days to update your filings. If they don't update the filings in 7 days, they can be fined $1,000. But they updated their filings, they amended their filings. So they're only going to pay a $100 fine for missing that. And for 128 at minimum, missing transactions from their pre-convention report, which is astonishing. But this also points out a big problem with our campaign finance system. There's no way to reconcile this. It does not exist. It does not reconcile between the different reports from the PACs and the parties and the candidates. None of that reconciles, and it doesn't appear that anyone at the state office is in charge of that. Nobody looks to see if these things are accurate. So there's a lot of just trust me, bro. A lot of trust me, bro. And for a lot of these transactions, I had to go digging in the county level candidate disclosures, which you can't access on the state site. So even if the state site found a way to reconcile these transactions across reports, the county level stuff would still be, you'd have to go digging in individual counties. Nothing talks to anything. And then even even lower down, there's the city level. We've got the Salt Lake City mayoral race coming up next year. And if you want to see what those candidates are spending, you have to go look at the disclosures on the city sites, and they have their own rules for elections. So Utah's campaign finance laws, not only are they a joke in terms of there's no limits on what anybody can donate to a candidate, and there's very few limits on what a candidate can spend things on, but there's no enforcement mechanism behind, to enforce the meager laws that we already have. It is insane. For instance, their speaker at their Lincoln Day dinner this year was, and I'm going to say this in quotes, historian Larry Schweikert, who is a favorite of the homeschool crowd. Okay, that's all you need to know about Larry Schweikert. Well, he was the speaker. Did they pay him a speaker's fee? Did they pay for his hotel? Did they pay for his flight in? We didn't know. We might know now. I haven't looked through their entire filing. But in 2024, they brought in Attorney General Ken Paxton as the keynote speaker for the fundraiser. I know because I was there. And they reported that they paid $1,900 and $1,950 for his airfare and another $291 for his hotel. But they didn't disclose that. And it's absolutely ridiculous that the only price that they're going to pay is a $100 fine from the lieutenant governor's office. Narcoleptic Mama says this is ridiculous. Yeah, it is. It is ridiculous. It's insane, but the only people who can change this at the state level are the legislature. And why would they change a system that seems to be working out pretty well for them? Why would they change that system? The perfect example, and this is the thing that got me in trouble with Senate President Stuart Adams, and one of the reasons why we allege in my lawsuit I was denied a press pass, because there were a number of complaints back in 2024. People complained about his campaign finance reports for him and his PAC, because state law says you cannot just report a credit card payment. You cannot just say I paid to American Express. You can't say I paid this much to American Express. You have to detail what you spent the money on. But for years, for hundreds of thousands of dollars of spending, Adams was only putting American Express on his campaign finance reports. And he doesn't really have a defense as to why he was doing this. He knew this was the law because he voted on it when it came through the legislature. He was one of the people. He was one of the people who voted on that. Selleck Stash says, your wife was right and you were wrong. The Bad News Bears was released in 76, 75. So I got the dates wrong. I was actually right when I said it. But I was discombobulated this evening because of all the technical issues with Streamlabs, who we're going to have a real come to Jesus talk tomorrow about, because I have no idea why it's not working on my machine after working for so long. So anyway, back to Stuart Adams. For years, hundreds of thousands of dollars of transactions. All he was putting on it was American Express, and there were multiple complaints filed against it. But they let him off the hook, even though they said he was wrong. And the reason why is because he got conflicting messages from the lieutenant governor's office. He was told, yes, you're doing this wrong. And then inexplicably, somebody said to him, no, you can do it the way that you're doing it. And then again, the lieutenant governor's office said, no, you have to list every single expenditure, the ultimate payee. So twice he was told, you're doing it wrong. You have to list the ultimate payee. One time he was told, no, you're just fine. You can just put American Express. And that's the one that he chose to listen to. And then after an investigation, the lieutenant governor's office basically said, you were breaking the law. Mind you, he was violating the law. This was a legal violation. It's in state law, and he was violating it. They said, you are violating the law, but we're just going to basically wag our finger at you and not issue any sanctions. When they said that, I said, are you going to go back and fix these campaign finance reports? He hasn't, and he's not going to. Because there's no enforcement mechanism for this. Sarah Marie says, and then he decided he needs the LG's office space at the Capitol. Yeah, they LG's office space and the state auditor space as well. Let's see what else is happening in the chat right now. Narcoleptic Mama says, the only reason anyone found out about Davis County stuff was you. They could have just kept going. That's the thing. My reporting shamed them into reporting it correctly. Otherwise, these things wouldn't have been going, and they would have just gotten a letter from the lieutenant governor's office saying, hey, you didn't file your report. You have 7 days to file the report, and you're going to get fined $100. $100 is nothing. When you have as much money flowing through politics, it's crazy that's all that we are. It's crazy that's the only punishment people have. But money is like Chase Thomas of Alliance for a Better Utah told me in my story. Utah's campaign finance laws are the wild, wild west. There's almost anything goes. And unless somebody's really watching, nobody's going to tell you that you're doing things wrong. Okay. I want to talk about this really quick, and then we can talk about Aaron Mendenhall. Couple of stories there. But I want to talk about this. If you've seen Senator Mike Lee and the other Republicans talking about the whole, their latest bit about the SAVE Act, the Save America Act, is that you have to show ID to get never-ending pasta at Olive Garden. Why can't you show ID to vote? Well, the problem is never-ending pasta is not a constitutional right. And people have to prove their citizenship when they register to vote. But, Mike Lee thinks he's got something here. He and his allies really think they did something here. But it's just the latest lame attempt to try and bully this thing into existence. And I've said before, the problem with the SAVE Act Sure, it requires proof of citizenship, but a driver's license isn't good enough. A driver's license is not good enough. It's your passport or your birth certificate. And the problem with that is if the name on your passport, say you get married and you take your husband's name, and then all of a sudden the name on your passport, the name on your government issued ID does not match the name on your birth certificate. Well, problem, and you might not be able to vote. It likely will disenfranchise you. Senator Mike Lee poo-poos that and says that's not what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen. He knows exactly what he's doing. This whole thing was cooked up by the Election Integrity Network, which was headed up for a good time by Cleta Mitchell, who was Donald Trump's lawyer. She is one of the biggest election deniers out there, or at least one of the biggest election conspirators. I'll say election deniers. She was Donald Trump's lawyer in the aftermath of the 2020 election. She was literally on that phone call where President Trump was asking Georgia election officials to find him 11,700 votes. She was on that call. And she's one of the people who helped to cook up this whole SAVE Act. It's a voter suppression piece of legislation. But Senator Lee thinks, he's got something clever here saying, if you have to show ID to get never-ending pasta at Olive Garden, then you should be able to show ID to vote. Well, one is a constitutionally protected right and the other is not. And if he wants to put never-ending pasta in the Constitution, if he wants to give all Americans the right to never-ending pasta, I would get behind that in a second. But that's probably not going to happen. So Narcoleptic Mama says, I went on X the other day just to see what the heck he's been talking about lately, and it's like nonstop obsession with the SAVE Act. Has anyone done like a welfare check on him recently? As I've said before, and as has been reported in other places, a lot of people think this is an audition for Trump because he really would like to replace Sam Alito in the Supreme Court if Justice Alito resigns, which, even though he hasn't, there was that story that broke on the last day of the term. He hasn't resigned yet. There are some signs that he might. The big one is the fact that he has a book coming out that publishes the day after the court starts its next term, which is a very interesting timing, extremely interesting timing. And this is just a way to get Trump's attention, by doing all this performative stuff. Because behind the scenes, this was reported in Puck News, but behind the scenes, when they have their Republican caucus lunches, Senate Majority Leader John Thune turns to Senator Lee because Lee is pushing for a talking filibuster where they debate and debate and debate until the Democrats just give up. That's what he wants. He wants a talking filibuster rather than the filibuster we have right now. And when this was reported by Puck News a couple of months ago, they said whenever Senate Majority Leader Thune turns to Lee in those meetings and says, okay, what's your plan for making this happen? What's your plan for managing it? If we were to go to the talking filibuster, if we were to demand a talking filibuster where people had to be on the floor, how would you manage this? And they say that Lee has no answers. He doesn't have a plan. I think he just wants to rattle sabers over this, get attention over this, rather than actually get this thing passed, because he knows it's not going to pass. They don't have the votes, and he doesn't have the juice. Selick Stack says, so you're good to sell guns without IDs? We have laws. We have laws about guns. I'm just saying that the comparison between the Olive Garden and voting is a stupid comparison. It's a dumb comparison. Congress enacted laws requiring IDs for gun sales. Okay, so that's the law. If they want to get this law passed, pass it. But by saying that it's the same thing as never-ending pasta at Olive Garden, it's stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Okay, we've got an election coming up next year. I mean, we're not even done with the 2026 midterms, but we have the 2027 Salt Lake City mayor's race. Mayor Maren Mendenhall has talked about how she might run for a third term, which hasn't been done for quite a while. I think the last three-term mayor in Salt Lake City was Garn. I may be wrong with that, but it's been a while since we've had a three-term mayor. Um, she has said that she might run. Senator Luz Escamilla has already said that she's going to run. She ran against Mendenhall when she was first elected. If you remember, Jim DeBacchus jumped into that race, and a lot of Democrats were like, "Oh God, no." No, 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 no. We cannot have Jim DeBacchus as mayor of Salt Lake City. So Aaron Mendenhall, who was a city council member at the time, um, jumped into the race and got a lot of backing from establishment Democrats who did not want Jim DeBacchus as mayor of Salt Lake City. And I think that they may have been right. That could have been an absolute disaster. So we've got possibly Mayor Mendenhall, and there was a story that came out this week that she and Kyle LaMalfa, her husband, are getting a divorce. So possibly that might be a factor. I don't know how much of a factor it is because when she was first elected, there was the story that was broken by City Weekly that she and LaMalfa were having an extramarital affair. While they were both on the city council, they would go to conferences together. Um, and um, and trying to find a delicate way to, well, I'm not going to say anything other than that these things would happen allegedly on on these conferences that they went to, or these trips that they went to funded by the city. So I don't know. I don't know how much that is going to play into it. And also, former Senator Derek Kitchen said that he is thinking about throwing his name into the ring. Um, I wonder how many people will get in. I remember when Rocky Anderson was first elected, there were so many Democrats in that race. Rocky Anderson ended up winning. And this was one of those races. We've seen these happen more. We've seen this happen so many times where somebody who gets in the race and everybody thinks they are the odds on favorite to be the winner. And then a whole bunch of other people get in the race and things go wonky and somebody else gets elected. And that's what happened when Rocky Anderson was first elected. Dave Jones, who was the minority leader in the Utah House of Representatives, very, very popular, very, very. I always liked Dave Jones when he was in the House of Representatives. One of my favorite politicians to talk to. Just a very, very smart man. I also came to appreciate Rocky Anderson in time as well. But Dave Jones got into that race, and then a whole bunch of other people. And that just created enough. The race is officially nonpartisan, but that created enough of an opening for Rocky Anderson to win. In fact, I do know, and I got the Utah Democratic Party to admit it to me at the time. They actually tried to get a couple of the Democratic candidates to drop out of the race to keep Anderson from becoming the mayor of Salt Lake City, because it looked like he was going to win, or he was going to go into I think he went into a runoff against Dave Jones, or he may have won outright. Anyway, Anderson defeated Jones when Jones was the odds-on favorite. We've seen that happen before. If you remember, when the fourth congressional district first came into being, that district, everyone thought it was specifically written for Carl Wimmer, who was in the House of Representatives and who ended up winning the Republican nomination that year, Mia Love, but Jim Matheson, the Democrat, ended up winning it. So that's the sort of thing that happens. Mayoral races are mercurial and they're really hard to predict. But I'm going to be fascinated to see how this plays out, especially with, Mendenhall's done a pretty good job, but the albatross around her neck has been the homeless issue. And I don't know if you're going to see, I know David Barra, who has run for mayor previously. Homelessness is one of his big issues. I don't know if he tries to get into this race. You will see more people than at least test the waters than the people who are currently thinking about it. Right now, we know of Mendenhall. Luz Escamilla, the state senator Luz Escamilla, and former state senator Derek Kitchen are the people who are thinking about it. I think Escamilla is already in. She did run, I remember, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, when and Mendenhall defeated her. I remember from that election, it was really interesting. I was watching the results come in. Salt Lake County used to be able to show you where the results would come in on a map. Now you can look at it precinct by precinct, but you can't really see it on a map. They show it on a map. And the thing that really did Escamilla in that race is the west side of Salt Lake City just did not come out to vote for her. And she really needs she needed a good turnout, a good showing from the Latino community, the west side of Salt Lake City, to win. And they just did not show up to vote for her. Maybe this time will be different. Who knows? So anyway, those are my thoughts on the upcoming Salt Lake City mayoral race, which is still a year away, and we still have to get through the midterms. Okay, I did say I was going to get to an update on my lawsuit against the state legislature. If you will remember, a couple of weeks ago, the 10th Circuit Court in Denver, my case was initially dismissed by the Utah District Court. We appealed to the 10th Circuit Court. A 3-judge panel in the 10th Circuit Court ruled unanimously in my favor in this in my appeal. I had 5 claims in my appeal. They revived 2 of them, said the district court improperly dismissed them. They said the district court erred in dismissing Schott's viewpoint discrimination claims. On his as-applied viewpoint challenge, he plausibly alleged that the legislature denied his application because of his news stories viewpoints. They're saying that I didn't prove my case, but I did plausibly make the case enough to consider this going forward, that the reason why the legislature did not give me a press pass, and I'm the only person who was not given a media credential in both 2024 for the 2025 and the 2026 sessions, was because they were discriminating against me because they don't like what I write. They also concluded that the district court erred in dismissing my facial viewpoint claim because it incorrectly found he failed to allege infringement of protected speech. So they said that journalism is protected speech. What I do is protected speech, and they erred when they dismissed that. So those issues are going down to the lower court. Well, the legislature had 14 days from the issuing of that opinion to ask the entire 10th Circuit, they call it en banc, meaning every judge in the circuit, not just the 3-judge panel, who again unanimously ruled in my favor. They want the entire court to reconsider this case. And I don't know how that's going to go, but they did file their argument. And it was very interesting. In their argument, my lawyer thinks that obviously my lawyer thinks that their case is pretty thin, but they said something really weird in their filing. One of the things they said is the opinion, this opinion, my claims of viewpoint discrimination, threatens the continued viability of Utah Capitol media credentials, which I can only interpret that to mean if I win my case, and they say they have to give me a credential, they're just going to get rid of all media credentials and not let the media and not have the press conferences or anything. And they're just not going to issue me media credentials at all. And then they want the other outlets to blame me. So that's how I read that. And I think that if Stuart Adams had won his reelection case, that's where we would be going. They would just eliminate media credentials altogether, and they wouldn't hold the media availability with the Senate president. They may not do that anyway. But that I thought that was interesting. It was odd. The other odd thing that they said in their opinion, and this makes no sense. It says consider citizen journalists affiliated with groups designed to oust legislative leadership. And then they link to an article from KSL, from reporter, a very fine reporter. I enjoy his work, Bridger Biel-Svetko. And the title of that is How a Data Center Helped Topple One of Utah's Most Powerful Lawmakers. So, according to this court filing from the legislature, they consider journalist Bridger Biel-Svetko a citizen journalist, because he's not, and KSL is a group that is, quote, designed to oust legislative leadership. That feels like a big time Freudian slip. I was talking about this with my attorneys, and they said it really feels like Stuart Adams is still sore about losing his primary race. Because why would you even say that? Why would you allege that KSL? Why would you talk about groups designed to oust legislative leadership, and then you link to a KSL article? That makes no sense. No sense at all. I read that and I was like, wait a minute. And it feels like they linked to the wrong article, but maybe not. It's so weird. So anyway, we have to file our reply by the 27th. That is our deadline for doing that. My lawyer says he plans to do that sooner rather than later. And then we just have to wait for the 10th Circuit Court. If they agree to rehear it, then we go and argue again. Or they consider everything again. If they don't agree to rehear it, then we go back down to the district court. And my two claims of viewpoint discrimination, now we have to start litigating that. And, you know, as I've said before, I've already sat for a sworn deposition in this. The legislative staffers have already sat for a sworn deposition in this. And, you know, so it's entirely possible that this could go to trial. I don't know how far the legislature wants to take this. It's entirely possible it could go to trial, but you know, if it goes to trial, there's a discovery phase. And that means that the legislature, legislative leaders, legislative staffers, they'll have to turn over emails to me, a journalist. I'll get to see this stuff. And there's nothing that says I can't report on it. I'm actually drooling a little bit at the idea of getting access to these emails because, you know, sometimes when I make open records requests for the legislature and I know something exists, I'm told it doesn't exist, but I know it exists. Like I've been told, there have been times when I've been told about emails, specific emails from a person to a person. And then when I put in a request to get that email, I am told it doesn't exist, even though I know it exists and I've seen it. Like somebody showed it to me. But this would be a court order rather than a grandma request. So they would have to turn stuff over. And I'd be really interested to see what those discussions were about this, what the discussions were, you know, whether they consulted any other members of the Utah media on this new policy that we are alleging was written specifically to exclude me. I'm pretty sure that at least I've gotten some indications that there might be at least one of my colleagues who did that. One of my colleagues who enjoys the taste of boot leather. I would really like to find that out. So if it does go back down to the district court, you know, if the 10th Circuit Court rejects this and goes back down to the district court, then it opens up a whole new phase of this. And we're just hoping that they will decide to settle, especially with Adams being out. We're just hoping that they will decide to settle. I don't know. Palmer Dale on Instagram says there is a fund set up to help finance your lawsuit. I'd like to contribute, and I suspect others would too. I'm actually being represented pro bono by the Institute for Free Speech out of Washington, D.C. You can find their website, ifs.org. I'm sure that you can make a donation there, but they are representing me pro bono. This is what they do. They represent journalists who are in free speech disputes with the government. They've done this in a number of other states, and they win a lot more than they lose. So you can go to ifs.org, and if you want, and if you're feeling in the giving mood, you can always go over to my website, utahpolitics.news, and throw some money in the tip jar. That helps me continue to do this work as an independent journalist because I'm 100% reader funded, no corporations. So let's go through some of the comments before we end up here. Let's see. Over to TikTok. There's a comment here. It says, just give the press pass, stop wasting money. Yes, I told you this a couple of weeks ago. I got a hold of the receipts for the legislature because they're not being represented by the Attorney General's office, which is usually the case. They're being represented by an outside law firm from Washington, D.C. at between $595 and $700 an hour. And so far, this thing, I filed my lawsuit, everything we've done in court, all of that stuff has cost the taxpayers of Utah $428,000. And then that's how much they have paid this outside, this outside group, this outside attorneys firm, this outside law firm, to represent the state against me, to deny me a press pass, $428,000. There will be more costs because they're asking for a rehearing at the 10th Circuit. No matter what happens with that, there will be more costs. And eventually, if I win, my attorneys will get their costs paid for by the state of Utah. And so either way, a lot more money is taxpayers are going to have to fork over a lot more money because Stuart Adams doesn't want me to be able to ask him questions. That's the whole thing. You, the taxpayer, are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to lawyers from Washington, D.C. to keep me from getting a press pass. Sarah Marie says, can they sue if the legislature takes away press passes? I don't know. I'm sure there's going to be some grumbling. I'm sure that, the biggest fallout from that is going to be they won't be having like these daily media, because that's really the only thing it gets you. The only thing the press pass really gets you is access to this daily media availability with Stuart Adams. Also, you can't be on their press release list unless you have a press pass, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But that's how they keep me from being in the loop of what's happening up at the legislature. I know other outlets, when they have angered Senate President Stuart Adams, they have found themselves off of the legislature's press list. I know that that's happened as well. So anyway, I don't know if they can sue, but I think they're hoping that everybody will blame me for if they decide to alter the press pass or get rid of them or whatever they come up with. I don't know. But yeah, they are spending a bunch of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to keep me from getting a press pass. Anyway, well, I'm about, let's see. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this too. And maybe we'll talk about this a little bit. Katie Did It on YouTube says, maybe you already discussed this, but what's up with Senator Todd Weiler and the Southern Institute? Conflict of interest? Not in Utah. Senator Todd Weiler is becoming the CEO of the Sutherland Institute. That is a right-wing think tank. And they are very influential in Utah politics. They get a lot of stuff passed. I don't know if you've heard of, I think it's called the Prosperity Path. It's something they're teaching kids in schools. It's where you teach kids that the proper thing to do in life is you go to school and you go to college, then you get married and you have kids. That will set you up for success. And that's part of the curriculum here in Utah. They were behind that. It's in a lot of other states too, but that was one of the things that they want to do. They get a lot of stuff passed here in Utah. And now Senator Todd Weiler, sitting senator, is going to be the group's CEO. And a lot of people are saying it's a conflict. I mean, it certainly looks like a conflict, but it's not a conflict. He's not the first person to do this. Jim DeBackus was the chairman of the Utah Democratic Party and a sitting state senator. Was that a conflict? Maybe, because he's not only representing Democrats, he's representing Republicans. Howard Stevenson was the head of the Utah Taxpayers Association, another extremely influential organization, and in the Senate. Not only that, but he was a registered lobbyist for the Utah Taxpayers Association. Yeah, it seems weird, but there's nothing that says you can't do that. I say to Todd Weiler, good luck in beating the allegations. Everything Weiler is going to do is going to be scrutinized as, is he doing it for his constituents, or is he doing it on behalf of the Sutherland Institute? And that's a legitimate question to ask for every single one of these. But it's not a conflict. It's happened many times before. But I think Weiler, good luck to him on anything he proposes, anything he argues. He's opening himself up to these allegations that say, the easy question is, are you doing this on behalf of your constituents, or are you doing this on behalf of your employer, the Sutherland Institute? But this is a common thing that happens. Zions Bank, they hire a lot of sitting legislators to work, I think, in their community outreach department, but they have a lot of people. They have in the past, and I think that they still do, have quite a bit, hire a number of members of the legislature. Other companies do the same thing. There was one lawmaker a number of years ago who worked for a big company here in Utah. They were a lobbyist. They were a government relations person for that company in other states. They didn't do it here in Utah, but they were the government relations person in other states. So it happens all the time. Is it a conflict? It sure smells like one. But is it? I don't know. I have no idea. Under the rules, it's not. Don't hate the player, hate the game, So, but I think it is a totally legitimate question. Anything he does, anything he proposes, any piece of legislation he advocates for, the question has to be, are you doing this on behalf of your constituents or on behalf of your employer, the Sutherland Institute? And if this legislation just happens to overlap with something the Sutherland Institute wants to do, that's going to be a really interesting discussion to have. And I certainly hope that he will answer questions. I really have no complaints about my relationship with Weiler. He's been very open with me. He's more than willing to answer my questions when I ask them. But overall, it doesn't look good. The perception is not great. And one of the things that the Sutherland Institute has been pushing for years, the name of the program is escaping me, or what they're calling it, but instead of welfare and other social programs, they want just one account. People just get paid into one account. That's something they've been pushing for years. It's kind of a block group sort of thing, and there's a lot of problems with that approach, but it's something that they've been pushing for years. And I'll be interested to watch to see if that is something that Weiler pushes for, Weiler gets on board with. I doubt he would actually sponsor that bill. I think that someone else would do that. But anyway, I think that'll probably do it for the show tonight. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for joining tonight. It's been fun. Boy, we've been talking for almost 2 hours. This is a blast. I really like enjoying this. You guys have great questions. You have great comments. I always appreciate that. One last thing. Katie did it says, so was Trevor Lee's bargain with his employer legal or just corrupt? Well, it's being investigated by the AG's office. And I think the issue there is that at least what the former employer alleges is that Trevor was trying to use his legislative seat to enrich himself, which you cannot do. That is illegal. So that I think is the difference there. So anyway, that's going to do it for tonight. Let me ask you to do a couple of things before we go. One, give me a follow on whatever platform you are watching this on tonight. YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Just hit that follow button, like and follow. That helps. Every little bit of that helps. Then go to my website, utahpolitics.news. Sign up for my newsletter. It's free. And if you want to make more live streams like this, if you possible, if you want to make more of my journalism possible, if you want to support the work that I do, there's two things you can do. One, become a paying subscriber. It's $5 a month, $55 a year. You get a few extra things and you help make this possible. If you don't want to do a subscription, I totally understand that. You can throw some money in the tip jar, $5, $10, whatever. All of it goes to this independent journalism. Every single dollar supports what I do. This is my full-time job, and I intend to keep doing it as long as you guys want me to. I don't have corporations. I don't sell ads. I don't do any of that stuff. I rely on you to make this possible. So if you can, follow me. Go to my website, utahpolitics.news. Click all the buttons there, and you'll make more of this possible. I really appreciate your time tonight. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to talk about. We will be back next week for sure. If anything else breaks, we'll do another one this evening, or we'll do another one as news warrants. But thank you again, everybody, and have a great night.